I'd like to call to order the June 2022 meeting of the Morrisville Planning and Zoning Board. You can join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Any changes in the agenda?
No, Chairman.
I have a motion.
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is adopted. Has everyone looked the minutes over? Any questions or concerns, changes? Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes?
I move to adopt the minutes of the May 12th meeting.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries. So I guess we don't have any other presentations.
No, we do
Okay.
not.
So is there anyone here that has a public comment that is not related to any of the three items we're considering today? It appears we have none. So we can move forward with the signage.
Good evening, Chairman Langston, board members. Myself, along with our Transportation Planner 1, Caleb Allred, will be presenting item 186. Where's my presentation? Sorry. -0. Nope. Sorry about that. Here we go. Item 2022-186-0, which is proposed amendments from staff related to principal uses, signage, and access and circulation. First section, principal uses. Staff proposes amendments to table 4.2.4, just to allow elementary, middle, and high school uses in the office institutional zoning district. This proposed amendment is primarily related to the Wake County High School, which has been approved next to Wake Tech campus. The next proposed amendment is in section 5.16.4, standards for specific sign types. Staff proposes adding this language to this section, specifically for sites 25 acres or greater in area, or with 400,000 square feet or greater of floor area, an applicant shall have the option to submit a master sign plan to be reviewed in accordance with section 2.5.5 of this ordinance. For each sign within a master sign plan application, the applicant must submit a sign permit application to be reviewed for conformance with sections 2.5.12 and 5.16 of this ordinance. After kind of proposing this language, staff has reached out to Wake Tech representatives for some feedback on some of the language. It was brought to our attention that section 5.16, in conformance with that, may kind of be counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve, in that that is the signage section. They would basically there would be no point to the actual master sign plan if they have to conform to the entire signage section. So staff is considering removing that or adjusting that language, just so you know. Following slide is just procedural amendments. So for table 2.3, summary table of development review procedures, table 2.4.5B1, public notice requirements, and section 2.5.5 is the actual layout of how the review, the master sign plan review and procedures will take place. It's very similar to the rezoning procedures, and those can be found in Exhibit A in your agenda packet. And then for my section, finally, UDO section 3.7.3, staff proposes an amendment to this section, the Main Street Plan Development Zoning District, to allow signage in the district to be reviewed and approved as part of the PD plan agreement. Essentially, right now, it says that modifications to any signage in this district is prohibited. Staff proposes to allow modifications of that through the PD plan agreement similar to the mixed-use plan development zoning district. And that is my section. Caleb will address access and circulation.
Thank you, Elliot. Can everybody hear me?
Cool. Thank you.
So my name's Caleb Allred, Transportation Planner 1. I'm just talking a little bit about access and circulation, proposed amendments from staff, specifically in sections 5.8, 9.7, and 9.8. And so a little bit different than Elliot, I'll go through kind of the background of those sections and then some of those proposed changes that staff are recommending. To start, section 5.8, access and circulation. This section regulates pedestrian and vehicular site design. So we're thinking development specific on the development design regulations. Additionally, it kind of gives teeth to the comprehensive transportation plan and requires developments to improve their road frontage improvements as identified in that the transportation plan. And then finally, the section sets the standards and requirements pertaining to traffic impact analyses, the TIAs. Section 9.7, non-conforming site features, describes the thresholds by which existing developments need to comply with the UDO. So obviously the UDO is changed periodically from time to time, which as a result will inevitably make certain sites non-conforming to that UDO. So this section just identifies, here, this is what you have to do in order to be required to bring your site up to standard. That section 9.7 is applicable to many of the development standard sections like landscaping section and parking and loading section of the UDO. The section that's applicable to 5.8 is actually section 9.8. Interestingly enough, section 9.8 is almost identical to 9.7 in its writing. It's just pertaining specifically to section 5.8. Staff are recommending a couple of things. So for starters, it's good practice just to not have a lot of redundancies in the UDO. So staff are recommending to remove section 9.8 and kind of include and incorporate section 5.8, access and circulation, into section 9.7. So what that would do is in addition to landscaping, to parking and loading, we're also going to add section 5.8 and have uniform standards for, hey, you hit these thresholds and you need to bring your site up to compliance with development regulations as a whole. Additionally, staff are proposing to remove language in section 5.8 surrounding cross-access waivers or cross-access requirements when it's being provided by a local street. So this actually has been something, the language is a little confusing in the ordinance, and staff have had some confusion administering that to developers. So essentially we have two different requirements in the UDO. You have public street continuation, where certain developments and certain uses have to extend public street connection to their property line. Additionally, other developments are required to extend cross-access connection, which is essentially a driveway stub. So the intent of the current language is to, if you are required to do one, you don't have to do the other because you're essentially doing the same thing twice. That language is not clear. So staff and the UDO in fact requires that regardless. So staff are recommending removing the existing language. That's just caused a lot of confusion. Additionally, there are grammatical corrections that result of these proposed text changes that staff are also proposing. And that concludes my slides. I think if you guys have any questions for Elliot or I.
Yes, just last few slides here.
My apologies.
So staff is recommending that the Planning and Zoning Board recommend approval of the proposed UDO text amendments with route changes in order to allow for more flexibility for developers and property owners while also providing more clarification for the UDO moving forward. Potential options for the Planning and Zoning Board are recommending approval of the proposed amendments, recommending approval with any changes, or recommending denial. And then this would be the ordinance language that you would be including with your recommendation. And I think that's all we have. So if you have any questions for either of us, be happy to answer them.
David, let's start down there this time. Any questions?
No questions. I did have a question for Elliot on your slide 3, I think. Yeah, this is the one. Keep going down a little.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So is this saying that when they have a master sign plan, you would basically treat that like any rezoning application?
So it's essentially the same procedure as the rezoning. So when they come in with a master sign plan, it will come to staff for initial review. Michelle will make a recommendation to you all. They'll present to you. You'll be allowed to review it, make a recommendation to council, and then it will go to 3 meetings with council before they take action.
So maybe I'm struggling with this a little bit for this purposes that we have signage standards, right, which basically provides guidance to builders or whoever that this is the kind of signage you need. Mm-hmm. So why are we adding more layers of approval if they are just combining different signage rules or signage requirements into a master plan? Maybe I'm not getting the perspective of what a master plan is and why is it any different from any signage that any company or institution or business might want to put out.
Yeah, that's a great question. And essentially this came about while Michelle and I were having discussions specifically with Wake Tech about kind of future, their future layout, what signage they're going to need. Essentially the way the UDO reads currently, there's no difference between, say, a 3-acre site and a 90-acre site based on how we're addressing signage requirements. So this is really to adjust for those larger developments that might need kind of unique standards. Looking into adjacent municipalities, most of them have some form of this language written in. It's just an adjustment that we felt was kind of necessary for those. We don't have many, but those larger developments like the Wake Tech campus and so forth. So I think specifically one type of sign in our discussions, they would only be allowed to have 4 across their entire campus. Now that's fine for a 1.5-acre site, but when you're talking about the size of Wake County, when they need directional signage and so forth across the campus, it just doesn't really add up. So this is really to allow those larger sites to just some flexibility, so they don't have to try and conform to those small numbers.
I don't have a problem with the master signing plan itself. My question was more in terms of why does it have to go through a rezoning kind of application where PZB has to review it, town council has to review it. What is the purpose of that? I mean, if instead, could we not authorize the staff that give them the flexibility so that it helps people together, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, that is, again, great question. That's kind of part of why we're here too, to get your feedback, get council's feedback. Obviously, that is an option. Michelle and I discussed that. She ultimately felt a little more comfortable having you all allow input, especially if it's a large site, a lot of signage, a lot of numbers, and then also having council's input as well. But Michelle, I don't know if you have anything you want to add, but that's kind of why we ended up the way we did.
Yeah, if it goes and is reviewed at the staff level, which is an option, you're putting a lot of authority into one person, and it adds subjectivity into that process. And consistency from application to application is important. And by bringing it through kind of a process, you're opening it up to if you were writing new UDO, that's considered a policy change. You would bring that forward through a review process to make that change. This is essentially amending the code for a specific development, so we thought it was appropriate to use that same process. But you're putting a lot of authority in one person. Right now, that's me. At another point in time, it could be someone else. And even if you do that by state law, there have to be standards that you review it against. It increases the subjectivity.
Okay. I just feel that the process kind of extends as you start going through the review process. And, it really doesn't solve the subjectivity question, reasoning, because at the end of the day, we look at these things application by application, right? And I think if we could standardize these things, right? I mean, the signage itself is standard. We are talking about whether they should have 4 versus 10 versus whatnot, right? I personally feel that this is something that we can help the businesses by reducing the bureaucratic burden associated with this.
But am I wrong? It's a different standard when we review something based upon this discussion, and when you review it, there's like a whole different legal standard there. Is that not correct? So that's one of the reasons why we would do that.
When you're reviewing it, it's more of a policy decision. Correct. It's a legislative review. Whenever we have an administrative adjustment in the code, there are strict standards that those adjustments need to be reviewed against to take the subjectivity out to the extent possible. Right now, there is an adjustment in terms of sign area. So staff is allowed to grant, I think, up to a 10% adjustment, for the size of a sign. That's the only sign adjustment in the code right now. I will say, with the Wake Tech example, there are sign types that I think they would like to incorporate onto their property in their parking lots and things like that aren't even currently addressed in the code. So they would be adding a whole nother sign type that doesn't have any standards associated with it in terms of height or area.
Okay, thanks.
Elliot, I have a question going back to the schools being allowed in the O&I zoning areas. Mm-hmm. And you might have said it at the beginning, and it went over me. Was the impetus behind that the lack of available land?
Primarily with the newly approved Wake County High School next to Wake Tech campus, that is the zoning district for that site. So it's really just to assist them and move the process along a little faster to avoid having to do a rezoning for that site, which can add another 4 to 5 months onto their timeline. So that was really the idea behind it.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Correct.
I had a similar question to Sanjay, but my only point was a clarification around the signing. So 2.5.4 for the master planning, it's just a difference in numbers. It references 10 acres and 100 square foot building. So I just wondered why for the signage, you're duplicating that process and the process flow, but you bumped it up to 25 acres and 400 square foot building. Was that the intent? To make it larger? Because I was thinking, that's great, you want to do the conceptual review of the master plan, but then when you came back to the signage, you're requiring a much larger property for the signage review than for the conceptual development. Right,
yeah, and that is another aspect that we discussed on our side. Really looking at kind of comparatively to adjacent municipalities, most of them don't have any parameters. They kind of leave it wide open. We didn't really feel comfortable having nothing there and just saying, some of them just say large developments, which could really be subjective, Just looking around at what sites are still existing, what sites could be affected by this actual sign plan, master sign plan. 25 acres just kind of became an average of some of those sites that we looked at. 400,000 square feet, similar. Looking at different sites that have already been in plan review, have already been built out. It just seemed like an average. So again, that is another aspect that we were looking for feedback. That is basically how we got to those numbers.
Okay. I support it. I think it's good to have a review as well as the square footage and the development. I think those are both good.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that will limit it. I mean, it won't be like everybody being able to do that. So on this one, you were saying you were going to modify potentially the 5.16. So I mean, would
Yeah,
that
so-
affect what we would act today? How would we want to capture that?
Yeah, and I mean, you can, I mean, obviously you can include that in your recommendation as far as with changes, if you're in agreement with that. I mean, just a little more detail. Basically, the idea behind including that originally was once the sign plan is approved, then they start actually submitting permits to put the signage in. For each sign, they would come in and we would review as normal sign plan. They would still have to meet kind of the dimensional and square footage standards so that we're not getting gigantic and, you know, outrageous signs. That was kind of the idea behind it, but we saw that that could be limiting as far as allowing different numbers and so forth of signs. So that's kind of why we're thinking maybe now we just remove it in general.
So then if you can scroll down to the cross-access. So when I was reading this before, I kind of read that as saying that, well, when you were talking about taking out the need to do it, so are you trying to make it more strenuous or less so? I guess I was thinking it was to make this more strict, but it sounds like what you're saying, the idea is to make it less strict?
Are you referring to the cross-access, like removing the local street?
Yes.
And I apologize for the lack of clarity in the materials. The intent is, so the way that the ordinance is organized right now, the requirement is there regardless. The intent of this is that the language, when discussing with developers about what the requirement is, that language that we're proposing, or that staff is proposing to remove, is unclear. So staff is just proposing to remove it. It won't have any practical impact on development. They will be required to do the same thing because the UDO, it doesn't explicitly say, right, if you do that one, you don't have to do the other. But the way that it's organized, the way the requirements are laid out for you, those are the requirements. That's what you're expected to do. So it's more of a clarity thing.
Okay. Any follow-up or any other questions? So if we just go ahead and vote to approve this, then maybe we can just say with the recommendations that you modify that section. I mean, I just want to look to make sure we do this in a way that is, you know, correct for.
Are you referring to
like if we were to say we recommend approval with the modifications to that once to, I don't know how you would want us to say that, but.
You could certainly, would you have any recommended, really whatever language you guys want to use?
Yeah, so we recommend approval with, you know, the following changes, and I think we're now up to that, and if we want to tack on the 5.16 removal as well.
Okay, I'm just, you know, trying to help everybody with how we would say this and do it in a way that does what you want.
Yeah, I think it might be a recommendation with the condition that the reference to 516 be removed.
Okay. So do we have anybody that would like to make a motion?
If anyone wants to make a motion, the ordinance language is on the screen.
I can do it. I mean, I can make a motion.
I can make the motion.
Okay.
I make the motion that ordinance 2022-186-0 of the Morrisville Town Council approve text amendments to United Development Ordinance related to principal uses, signage, access, and circulation, and removing with review of section 5.16.
We have a second.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now on to Chris. I thought about you when I read this. So I thought about you when I read this. Your day has come.
All right, good evening. Everyone ready? Good to go?
I'm not sure we can really hear you.
Can y'all hear me in the mic? Can you hear me now? Okay, I'll speak louder. All right, good evening. Tonight I'm presenting an item titled Development Agreement for the Construction of a Portion of International Drive. Not sure if this board has heard a development agreement before, so I'll briefly kind of just say what it means before I get into the presentation. Essentially, the town is formalizing an agreement with the developer. The developer will build a portion of International Drive that's in town-owned right-of-way, and the town will compensate the developer with previously collected payment in lieu, as well as potentially other money. That's essentially the gist of it. Tonight, we have Catherine Jacobs, who's in the town stormwater division. If you have any questions that she might be able to answer. We also have representatives from the development team to my right here. Again, they don't have a formal presentation that I'm aware of, but they are here to answer questions in case the board has any for them. So let's just start with some background. This is for International Drive, which is a town road on the eastern side of town. You can see its location here. The red arrows point to it. It currently starts at Aviation and dead ends north of Southport Drive. This is a fairly heavy industrial area of town. No neighborhoods off this road or anything like that. International Drive has been on the town's capital improvement project plan since 2004, and it's been in the transportation plan since 2009. So I jumped ahead a slide, but it dead ends at the past Southport Drive. Here's an image of what it looks like currently. Again, you have road barriers up. It's planned to be continued at some point. So how did we get here? So adjacent developments have built International Drive up to this point. There are two developments currently on either side of where it dead ends. Those developments could not actually physically build the road due to permitting issues related to environmental features. If you can see on my slide, there's a blue line here. That's part of the environmental feature. Essentially, there's streams that run across there that are regulated by the state. The developments next to where it dead ends have contributed a total of $354,000 to the town in payment in lieu of construction. So they've paid the town because they could not actually physically build the road, leaving the responsibility to the town to build it in the future. So at this time, a development named Spark has been proposed on the northern side of those environmental features. So if I go back a slide, on this side of the stream. And they are also required, the Spark development is also required to build a portion of International Drive. This development and developer has preliminarily agreed to essentially construct the portion that's in the town-owned right-of-way using the town money as a reimbursement to build that section. These projects would complete both International Drive and a road called the Morrisville East Connector. And I'm going to jump back. I should have mentioned this earlier. This is a snip from the transportation plan. International Drive is shown here, and this dotted line that runs left to right is a road known as the Morrisville East Connector. That's not going to be its official road name at the end of the day, but that is what the plan called it. So it's going to connect McCrimmon and Airport Boulevard. So essentially, when the Spark development's finished, all these roads in this area will be completed. All right, I'll keep going. Please let me know if you have any questions or want me to jump back to anything. So here is a conceptual plan of the buildings that are being constructed, the road that will be constructed, and the green box highlights the area that's under consideration for this development agreement. Okay, I'll keep moving. This is zoomed out a little farther. Again, on the McCrimmon area, it shows essentially every plan that has been submitted through either a formal review process or at least for a pre-submittal meeting. I've kind of sketched them all together here, stitched them all together here. Again, the general area in question is this red line right in the middle. So my point in showing you this is that this connection could really serve as a good connection between all these developments that are under review right now, as well as some developments that have previously existed. All right, so let me cover some key facts. So this is a voluntary agreement that the town and the developer will enter. International Drive is not required to be completed at this point. The town owns right-of-way where the road itself was not actually finished, but the town is responsible for it. So again, it's not required to be built at this time, but if it's not built now, the town is essentially still on the hook to build it at a later point. and work with the developer at that point to build it. Another key fact, like I showed you on that map, there's a lot of development in that area. Town staff really think that this area would benefit from that extra connection north of International Drive that would connect McCrimmon and Airport Boulevard. So currently, if you're on International Drive, you can only come out on Southport on a Chapel Hill Road or onto Aviation. So I can go back to the map if you need me to show that too. So let me talk about the request a little bit. So essentially, again, the town is working with the developer. They're developing a property next door, and as part of the process, town staff said, hey, we've got this extra right-of-way, we've got this payment in lieu money. We think it would benefit your development to have this connection, and the Spark Development seems to have agreed with that. So the development agreement was one of the attachments itself, but here's generally what each side has agreed to, or would agree to with this agreement. The Spark Development would construct the remainder of International Drive. That's within the town-owned right-of-way. The term in the agreement is within 3 years of the execution of the agreement. We would expect that it would be developed sooner. It's planned to be built with the first phase of the Spark Development, but again, 3 years is when the town would expect the road to be built. The Spark developers and their staff would apply for all appropriate permits from International Drive. Again, it has to cross those environmental features, so there's permitting through the state and the Corps of Engineers, and Spark would essentially file all the paperwork for the town. The town would serve as the applicant on some of it, and the reason that is done like that is to break the permits into two different parts rather than having one massive permit. The town would serve as one applicant. The Spark Development would serve as the other applicant. And the last thing that Spark essentially agrees to is they're going to pay for all the permitting that's outside of any of the town-owned right-of-way. So the message tonight I would send is that while the town might serve as the applicant for areas outside of what the town currently owns, the town's only going to pay for anything that's required from what the town already owns. Okay, so let me move on to what the town would agree to in this agreement. We'd reimburse Spark the $354,000 from previously collected street payment in lieu money. The town would serve as the official applicant for these permits, but would only pay for the town-owned sections. And on top of the $354,000, the town would contribute up to $500,000 for environmental permits of International Drive that are located in the town-owned right-of-way. And let me explain that last number a little bit. That is the highest potential ask, the highest potential amount that's expected to pay for the environmental permits. We expect it to be lower than that. That is the amount but that's the maximum amount that we think it might be.
Just, you could back up to slide 2 again. Just I want to understand a little bit about the scope. So this is including an extension to that. It's not including the connector, right? Is that accurate?
Right.
So it'll still be a dead end. It's just extending that dead end.
So let me slide to a different slide actually.
Eventually.
So essentially, the Spark Development is responsible for everything my mouse follows here from left to right, and a little bit of a T here. The town owns this area that's not currently built. Because Spark is proposing to build all these roads, staff at an earlier meeting just said, look, we've got this leftover dead end. Why don't you go ahead and connect it, and we'll pay you the money that's already been collected. So that's kind of what the agreement is. Without these roads being built and it fully connected, this would not be before you tonight. All right, so cover that slide. So again, staff recommendation, town staff from the various development review agencies believe that this is the time to execute this agreement. It's been out there for a long time. We've got a developer who is willing to work with the town. There's multiple reasons why we recommend approval at this time, but essentially your town staff feel that this is the time to do it. It's most likely only going to get more expensive in the future. And with all the developments that are happening out there on International Drive, on McCrimmon, on Airport, that this extra connection will really be a positive thing for that area. So your suggested action tonight is you are voting to recommend approval with changes, or denial of the resolution to Town Council. And the resolution would be to enact this development agreement. That's all I have.
Thank you. Chris, I'll start with you this time. Any questions?
I mean, no
Any
questions. I'm glad to see it move forward.
Yeah, I second that. I've been a big proponent of, developing whatever we take for, in payment of lieu quickly. I mean, here we are 22 years later building this connection, so better late than never. But I definitely agree that this is the right approach and we should probably do this more often. Could you go back to, I think, 2 slides up? One more? No, one more.
More.
So you said something that confused me. Okay. So it says so pay for environmental permits. Isn't that covered in the Spark one? And so I'm confused, why are we, in the following slide, you mentioned that town will be paying only for town-owned section in the second bullet. Is Spark paying for, I thought in the previous one, the impression I got was Spark is going to apply and pay for all environmental permits. And here I'm getting the impression that, yeah, they will do that upfront and we will reimburse them for the town only. Is that the intent?
Yeah, it's a little confusing. I can explain it again, but I also might need someone else to step up and kind of explain a little more detail of why this is happening this way. But essentially, the town is only going to pay for what's in the town-owned right-of-way. It's about 250 feet of right-of-way that was never actually constructed. But there are a number of environmental features that run in that area, and the roads all happen to align right where all these streams are. And there's different permits that have to be filled out. Spark staff are going to fill out the permits. The town will serve as the formal applicant. We will only pay for what's in the town right-of-way. And I don't know if anybody else wants to step up and explain why that came to that.
I mean, it sounds like, so the work of doing the applications, the lawyers, all that is on them. They're just going to put our name on it, correct? Is that
Chris Vostick, Kimley Horn, what you just said is absolutely correct. I am one of the staff that would be working on that on behalf of the town. As Chris mentioned, it's a pretty complex permitting process, and based on the permitting process requirements, it makes sense for the developer of the Spark project to apply for their portion, and then it makes sense for the town to apply for the portion that's in their right-of-way. So that's really the rationale behind it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, I was just asking for clarity in the way those 2 bullets are worded in the 2 slides. Because one in the previous slides gives the impression that Spark will do the permitting and pay for it as well, right? While the second slide, the second bullet says that, the town will pay for the permitting of that town section. So I think what you're saying is that regardless of this, the town, you will do all the work and town will contribute the permitting expense back to you.
That's exactly right, yes.
Thanks.
Ken? David?
Quick question. So you said it's about 250 feet of roadway that needs to be constructed there. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how much that costs in today's day, but $354,000 seems like a lot of money. I mean, what percentage of that would you ballpark actually use on the construction versus what share of that could be used towards the permits with DEQ and so forth?
I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. So as Chris mentioned, they're actually, within that very short 250-foot segment, there are actually there are 2 streams that we're crossing, one of which meanders in a very snake-like fashion. But when you have a stream that meanders in a snake-like fashion, your impacts are based on the amount of that linear footage of stream as you measure along the winding. So we have to do our best to minimize those impacts. So long story short, our estimate was that the fee and lieu costs would go toward maybe a third of the total cost of it. So, I mean, that's what the town has collected from previous development. So I think that's what we have to work with.
So it's about $1 million total, you would say, for 250 feet of roadway?
We have a twin 54-inch culvert for one of the crossings and then a 48-inch culvert for the other. One of them has 60 acres of drainage upstream and the other has 15 acres. So all the water is flowing right through there, unfortunately. So, yes.
Okay. And my last question I have is the $354,000 and some change that's been collected. payment in lieu. How is that, how was that originally determined? I know we're kind of getting in the weeds here, but how do you decide what developers pay for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. And before I answer that, if you don't mind, let me pull up another map, and that might help explain a little bit more.
Yeah, and while Chris is doing that, I'll just note that Catherine Jacobs from our stormwater team is also here this evening.
Here we go. So let me start with a little more zoomed in version of what it looks like. So if you can see, the road happens to kind of align at the worst possible area here. And that seems to be the contributor, the majority of that extra cost that kind of seems a little eye-popping. As far as how the numbers determined, essentially when a development comes in and is submitted for review, if they cannot actually build something, they submit based on what the town's plans call for, they submit a payment in lieu estimate. It's reviewed by our engineering staff, our planning staff. Catherine, if you have the answer.
What I would say in this scenario is that I'm speculating, is that when the payment in lieu was created for these two properties, I'm thinking that they took we're just going to assume that it's a traditional stream crossing, perpendicular, one crossing maximum, and they probably just didn't have the full picture because, as Chris was saying, Chris Bostic, was that we are crossing twice and one of them is parallel, and that's just the worst case scenario. So, they did account for stream and buffer crossings or impacts in their payment in lieu, but that's what I'm thinking, is that it was just an assumption.
That makes sense. Certainly an unfortunate area with the streams running that way, but it's important infrastructure connection, and glad to see it getting done.
Yeah, I just don't think that they just, thought it would be quite as hectic as it is in that area.
Certainly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Everyone asked what I was going to. Do we have a motion? Anyone ready to make a motion on this?
I will make the motion. I love this project, so. I make the motion to approve resolution 2022-168-0 of the Morrisville Town Council authorizing a development agreement with Spark Infrastructure Property Owner LLP for the construction of a portion of International Drive.
Second. Ken, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You just get to stay there.
All right, so good evening again. This presentation is about UDO text amendments. This board has heard several times about tree preservation, common open space, perimeter buffers, and other various landscaping matters. Tonight, this board is scheduled to take action on a recommendation. So let me just jump into the presentation. So let me back up and talk about the process and timing and just kind of remind everyone. So last PZB meeting was the brief and public comment. Tonight is staff follow-up on basically your questions, comments. We have another public comment session, and then again scheduled for the PZB recommendation tonight. Town Council is expected to begin review in July. The structure, so here's the structure of the presentation tonight. Essentially, I left in most of the slides from last meeting, included some new slides that kind of either have follow-up or have specific questions that I'd prefer the PZB to answer. And it's broken between trees, common open space, landscaping. So start with tree preservation. Updates since the previous meeting. Staff removed the requirement to establish new tree canopy if a site did not have 15 or 20% of the tree canopy that's required to be saved. So if you only have 5% of your tree canopy, that's all you'd have to save. It doesn't have to replant. We're going to get into that a little bit later to see if that's what the board wanted. I know there was a lot of discussion about that. The next thing was staff had proposed that trees that are located in where the street yard buffer would be located. Originally, it was 6-inch trees had to be preserved. I think last meeting I heard that 6-inch was probably too small. We basically doubled the size, so trees that are 12-inch in caliper or greater would have to be preserved at this point. Again, going to get into that and say, is that the right number for this board? So let's talk about some other updates. If you remember, there's a minimum tree canopy area that has been proposed to be established. Last meeting, it was 1,200 square feet. It has been raised to 1,600 square feet. That came with some conversation with other staff members in thinking about that square footage size. The next one is about tree protection fencing. So once you establish your actual area, which trees have to be saved, that tree protection fencing is really crucial because it preserves and protects those trees from getting damaged during construction. The current requirement is to place the fencing 1 foot outside of the drip line of a tree. Staff is proposing to change that, and part of the overall theme of making things simpler, more clear, is just to put the tree protection fencing 6 feet from the tree trunk of a tree. So whereas the drip line could be very large, very small, 6 feet is just a consistent number across the board to keep that fencing away from damaging the tree during construction. So that's some of the updates. Let's move into some of the questions that I would present to the board tonight. So the first one deals with the priority order. Essentially, the questions on the screen is the PZB satisfied with the priority order? Do you believe it's the right order? Is there something that needs changed? And I can zoom in to help kind of remind you of what that is. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sorry, Chris.
I'm indifferent, but I personally just think that 2 belongs in section below 4, but it's fine where it is. I just happen to think that was a lower priority than the greenways, but it's fine where it is. I don't know if anybody else had that feeling when they looked at it.
I guess the only issue I could see with that is, typically it's sensitive when they build one neighborhood beside another, and if you did end up cutting down trees that were there in that buffer or near that buffer, I think that could cause more issues with existing people. But I mean,
I'm fine. Let's keep it.
But I mean, again, I definitely like to try to force trees as much as we can into the property, where that's possible. But
I'm fine with the order. Is that your question? We go through and say we like the order?
I mean,
if you like it, yeah. Yeah.
You said this was our question.
Yeah, this is the question. Is the order, is there something that from last meeting, I think everyone kind of seemed pretty okay with the order, but is there something that struck you, is there something you thought about since then that might need changed?
If I have to look at it from a developer's point of view, I would actually flip 3 and 4, for the simple fact being a lot of the greenways and freeways or roadways, right? The town would be involved in some shape or form in its design, and I would think. Sorry.
It's adjacent to it though. It's not in it. I mean, 4 is meant to be just kind of like
catch on
everything else.
Everything else.
Right. So I mean, I think 4 needs to be the bottom. I think the real question would be, is 1, 2, 3 the order that you?
Yeah. No, makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, so and if I can explain kind of the structure in which I thought about when this was kind of being designed and talking with other staff, is the first 3 are your true priorities. That 4th is that catch-all.
Makes sense.
And there are going to be sites, it's not out of the question, there are going to be sites that do not have the first 3, and that 4th one's going to be the catch-all.
Yeah, I'm good.
And I think keep in mind too, these are all for adjacent, so it wouldn't necessarily be like the required buffer or the greenway itself. It would be something that's beside that. Which
I didn't read
that area a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't read the adjacent word, so but I agree.
Yeah, and just explain that a little bit. This picture right here is off Weaver Forest Way, and I took it strategically because right to the left of this is a house being built right now, and this is a greenway. So that was part of the thinking. More trees could be saved near those greenways, near that area.
Now, so we've sort of got off on a tangent here. Do you want, would you prefer to go through the whole thing or have questions as we go? I mean, it's a longer presentation, so I didn't know what would be the best.
It's long. I think there's not that many specific points of discussion. Really, it's just if there's one last thing that needed to be said, that change to be made, this is the time to say it.
I mean, I had one question on the previous slide, and it was something I thought about when I read this at home.
Yeah.
Is 6 feet really adequate to protect trees? I mean, the thing that was always drilled into me in talking to architects, landscape people all the time, and every project I ever did was that a tree is a mirror, and that the roots, for the most part, in most trees are going to extend the same size as the canopy.
Yeah.
And that's why the drip line requirements are there. I feel like for a lot of trees, a 6 foot is not going to go anywhere close to capturing that, and we're going to potentially allow people to drive on top of roofs. I mean,
so if it's 6 feet for a larger tree, some of the roots will get cut. But 6 feet is elsewhere in the UDO about the distance from the tree. Recently hired a staff member whose focus is in, I guess, horticulture, and she came up with a 6 feet. She recommended that's probably a good number. If PZB is more comfortable with increasing that,
I mean,
that's completely.
Me personally, I just want to make sure that we're doing something that is responsible and is defensible for what would work. Because it just goes against what people have said, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. I just, you know, that'd be the only thing was in a rush to sort of simplify things that we made it worse.
Yeah, and again, if PZ is more comfortable, 8 feet, 10 feet.
I mean, some of these trees you would be talking like 40 feet.
Yeah,
I mean, so.
And that was another, at least, thought that I had was when we're looking at a plan, staff's looking at a plan to review, there's all kinds of sizes of trees on a site. Some of them are very big, some are very small. And what that leads to sometimes are these, if you're looking at a plan, there's no straight line. Sometimes there's a large bubble with a big tree, sometimes there's a smaller one. So kind of establishing just a solid number. I think Apex did it also, or has a solid number and doesn't follow the drip line. Raleigh follows the roots system. There's different ways of doing it. In the end, I just thought a solid number, a consistent number was the best way to go. We're not tied to the 6 feet. That was just probably the lowest recommendation.
I'll think about it. You can think about it or whatever. All right, thank you. I guess anybody have any questions?
I have no questions. I think this is the right order.
All right. Well, I'll keep moving in, and we can come back if need to. Next few things, staff were proposing the 15% rate for a more commercial site and 20% for a single-family detached home neighborhood and multifamily. Those numbers still sound okay with the board. I think I didn't hear a lot of feedback or negativity, I guess, about these last time. And then last question was, do you want to maintain a priority order, or do you think, the town's raising the amount of tree preservation? Should we allow developers to have more flexibility in terms of where they can save trees?
I mean, I personally like the idea of some guidance. I mean, it shouldn't necessarily be there should be some flexibility, but I mean, then we'll get to a situation where we just got like a small little, mini group of trees and then nothing on the site. I mean, they can always come back and ask for some modification if they.
That's true.
Because if there's a property that certainly has some interesting features, different, whatever, that would be something I think to consider. But I think having the ability to review that, either at the staff or at this level, would be helpful. Okay.
I'd vote the opposite. I'd vote for the developer as long as they maintained a certain percentage of trees where they put those. I think the priority is around how they develop that piece of property and that it's appealing for its intent versus designing an entire property around trees. So I think the developer needs the flexibility to use that property as they see fit and put the trees that make sense for the development.
So, all right. So in that case, I mean, you'd be okay with them just having like little small copse of trees, and just say, okay, here it is, and we're just going to rest it's going to be tree free. I mean, that's just and maybe it's just a matter of just letting go. That's the fear I would get is if it's just too flexible that it wouldn't be
Their intent
appealing.
is either to use it for a business purpose or for residential or mixed use, and there's a lot of design and development that goes into open space, green space, how they use the internet. So there's a lot of design that goes into it, not just around the trees. And so trying to work your entire development around the tree versus a people hub or a living hub or a business hub is kind of designing backwards. So I'd like the flexibility with the developers. I can be flexible, but I see all the developers coming in and their plans, and just even for this little roadway, 350 feet was a major design. So if you're doing all of that design work around 20% trees on your property, it becomes very challenging.
So are you talking about the 15 to 20%, or are you talking about keeping the priority order? I mean, because we were just talking about the priority order, this would throw that out.
Yes, and it's saying, so it was saying stick with the priority or let the developers. So, I mean, that's just my opinion of what I see from different site plans that come in. The developers are designing for a specific use versus trees.
I mean, I guess I'm just trying to balance that with a lot of the well, one, I think people like trees, but a lot of the feedback we got, like especially the thing about Breckenridge, I keep going back to that just because I thought that was interesting. But they're, when you drive in there, at this point, they're basically almost mature trees lining both sides. There's some trees within the property. I mean, I wonder how that would be affected. I mean, I guess I don't know what the rules were back 20 years ago when we were done, but I don't know. We should be trying to be as balanced as possible, and I'm certainly open personally to either way.
So I have struggled with this as well, right? Because I've seen properties where they preserve it at the very corner, and the entire property is mostly barren of trees. I've seen places where things are all around, and you have got pockets. I am frankly okay with pockets. In fact, I would prefer pockets because they create different areas of shade throughout the property if that can be achieved. It's not. So I think as long as we can have that balance, that they are not wiping things up and then just planting small trees. There are existing trees and they are going to preserve them. And maybe we can, if the developer is allowed to choose a location, maybe we can provide some guidelines around it. Right? It shouldn't be one tree here, one tree there, and one tree there, but a collection spread over with some sizing.
Well, and if the board remembers from my last presentation, let me go to that slide. We're actually, because of the kind of pockets that, I don't remember what page it was on, anyways, because of the pockets that kind of happen now with the current tree preservation regulations, we're proposing that 1,600 square feet plus that cannot be smaller than 20 feet in width. Because currently, some site plans show trees when they first submit it, and it comes down to barely anything on the page, and there's no way a tree shaped like that. So, and to help regulate it, to help clarify up front, we're a minimum width and then a minimum square foot size. So that should help with some of the pockets.
Any comments from this end?
I was going to say, I like the idea of developers having flexibility, but at the same time, when they're developing their plans, there's a whole lot of rules and regulations from the town or the municipality that they've got to, plan for. And so these requirements are just another checklist thing that they have to plan for, and they have flexibility within that plan. They know this is what they have to do. At the same time, though, like I said, I like the flexibility. So, there's got to be some way where we can put like a floor and a ceiling.
Right, exactly.
I think I have a magic solution?
No magic solution. I think a lot of times we extend a lot of flexibility. So I would err on the other side.
Well, what is your opinion?
David is left.
I was just going to say, I see kind of both perspectives here. Would it be possible to set it up to where staff has autonomy to approve or disapprove, and if disapproved because they don't feel that it meets the board's intent or the UDO's intent, then an appeal comes before this board?
The problem with that is we get back to the same thing we talked about before, where you have the subjectivity, where this decision doesn't involve that. So I don't know how that would work exactly. If you had like hard numbers and it was boom between these, maybe, but
Yeah, in the current code, and Chris, you're going to have to remind me if it's in the draft. In the current code, there is some language that says you need to follow this priority order to the maximum extent practical. So under the current code, if priority number 1 is smack in the middle of the site where you would logically put a building, we do have some flexibility to go to the next one.
Okay. I can live with that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the same language is maximum practical.
So this is just a priority order, right? That's the thing we keep losing sight of. It's not a guarantee, it's a priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
On the 10 and 15%, could we just make it 20% across the board?
Well, those are for two different.
Yeah, I agreed. So I'm back. We have finished the discussion on the priority order, but
I'll say from a staff perspective, there's nothing that says it can't be consistent. Currently, the way the UDO is set up is just two different numbers for those types of uses, and we kept it consistent with that. If it's one number across the board, other towns, I think Raleigh is 10% across the board, no matter what the use. I don't see any issues with that as far as is it legally allowed? Yes, that's my answer.
I mean, was the idea because a non-residential or multifamily was going to be a little more impactful, that's why we would have it higher than like in residential? Is that what that came about?
So the idea, I'll tell a quick story. So when I was going into this, I thought that commercial sites were going to be the ones where people wanted more trees. And through our surveys, through talking to other staff, it was, actually neighborhoods and where people live should actually have a higher amount of tree preservation. And so I think that's probably why it was set up like that originally, just to have, there was a number set for commercial, and then it went a little higher for where people are living. And that's essentially what we've stuck with. If the board would like to recommend a consistent number across the board, that would go along with kind of the theme of keeping things, I don't know about more simple, but just consistent across the board. I wouldn't have an issue with that.
I think we should do that, and we should make it uniform 20%. That's my preference.
I agree.
I tend to lean towards less trees for.
Well, I mean, as much as I was going to ask, is that reasonable to say 20? I mean, how would that compare?
That's a lot of trees.
It is, but again, we do consistently hear that, people like trees but it needs to be enough flexibility that people can actually build. I mean, again, back to the balance, we want to try to make it so that it's And how does this compare to current again?
So essentially, if you remember, the current setup is a bracket with different, depending on how many trees are existing. But if you have a site that's 100% covered in trees for a commercial site, the max is 10%. For a more residential, it's 19%. So that would be the max. And then these numbers are higher, but essentially there's less trees on the site. So, but that's essentially, if you take a piece of property, 10% of that is dedicated toward trees automatically.
So the 15% is sort of smack in the middle of those two numbers. I mean, if we were trying to settle on one, that might be a better number than the 20, just because it would sort of.
I'm fine with the 15 and the 20 the way it is. I mean, if you want to lower the other one, that's fine, but I wouldn't raise the other one.
I mean, I mean, you do have obviously a lot more parking lot coverage in a non-residential.
You're still going to have
make it a little more difficult.
Street yard perimeter buffers, vehicle use area plantings, foundation plantings, on top of tree preservation.
I mean, maybe you have a good compromise already in there. So, I mean,
I can live with either, but if there is a median that could be arrived with that helps staff and builders and everybody else to conform, let's do that.
Okay.
So, okay. Well, I mean, you're comfortable with 15 and 20? I mean, you think that's a good?
I
mean, you've done a lot more research on this than the.
Well, all right. So, yeah. Well, you asked me earlier, I think, what my thoughts were. And again, somebody said there's no magic bullet, and there's really not. There's a lot of different things going on here. In my mind, if the percentage gets raised for how many trees, the priority order might need to be reduced some way. But if there's that fine balance between the town prioritizes trees next to greenways and we also value keeping a larger percentage of trees, this is the way to go. That's kind of the way I've approached it. If the town just values more trees overall, I would think the priority order needs to be reduced, or some other flexibility needs to be brought into the option. And staff flexibility, we can only go so far. We're supposed to be looking at things in a very black and white. Does this comply? Does it not comply?
You said Raleigh is 10%. What are any other, like what's Cary? They don't have a percent.
Cary's really focused on those larger trees. They call them champion trees. Yeah. Some of the towns further south, so it's Apex, Holly Springs, they're between 10, 20. Some go up to 30%, but that's a very specific area of those towns. So.
Right. So this doesn't seem onerous then necessarily. It's more than Raleigh, but it's not.
So the only thing I'll say when we compare ourselves, or when Morrisville compares itself to Apex, Holly Springs, Fuquay, Verena, those towns all have a lot more land left to grow and a lot larger tracts left to grow. Morrisville is essentially, it is what it is, growing as much as it's going to grow. There's more property to annex, but our jurisdiction is essentially boxed in.
So how does that statement then shift the context, if at all? So given what's left to develop, does that change the thinking around this or no?
So a lot of this is compared off those municipalities and are very close to it. My point of bringing that up is when you just strictly compare the numbers, the situations on the ground can be very different at times. So the property that's essentially left in Morrisville, and this is a really broad spectrum, is the property that wasn't easily developable 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
And there's not a lot of trees on them that are really, right?
Or there are a lot of trees because it's very low, it's very wetlands, it's riparian buffers. Besides the McCrimmon area, again, I'm painting with very broad strokes. Besides the McCrimmon area, the properties left in town are usually smaller. They're usually tucked in some strange little corner somewhere. The topography is like this. They're harder to develop. So while a lot of this is based on Apex, Holly Springs, Raleigh, other areas, the situation on the ground is often very different. And the other thing is when Director Stiegel and I, we met with Apex staff a month or two ago, they're looking more at neighborhoods, big 500 house neighborhoods. We're not looking at that style of development.
Are these percentages, are they hard numbers, or are they minimums or maximums, or?
They're hard minimums.
Okay.
There is an option to reduce the number if a site, let's say a site, just for some reason, a terrible site, I don't know a good way to describe it. They can apply to Director Stiegel for reduction in the percentage, but it has to meet 5 standards of the UDO set that's listed in the UDO. And those things would be like, what would they be like? Let's say the topography is really bad. The site really is at a hard angle, very difficult to develop. There's an existing utility line. There's a proposed utility line that the developer has no control over. Something like that, they can reduce it somewhat. Currently, if you remember the last meeting, currently a developer can just reduce the amount that's required to be preserved and replant somewhere else by up to almost 50%. We've taken that option out completely because it was taken advantage of so many times. If the board would like some level of flexibility, we could put some percentage back in that could be removed and replanted on another portion of the site. I don't think 49% is that's what it's currently at. I don't think that's appropriate. That's far too big. Maybe something 10, 15, 20%. So if there are those trees that are in the really just particularly bad spot for this particular site, they could be taken out and replanted.
I remember at the last meeting, there was some conversation with regard to the current requirements of, you have to go out there and you measure the canopy every however many years or whatever, which is a burden on everybody. And we're trying to make the UDO, I guess, more consistent, which will help everybody. So, I kind of like the idea of saying, hey, the canopy will be no less than X percent, but no more than Y percent. It gives the developer flexibility. It gives the town the ability to say, this is kind of what we want, not too much, not too little. I don't know.
Well, and that's, I won't say that's exactly what it does now, but it would say you have to save 15%. You don't have to save any more than 15%. But then again, they still have to plant, landscaping buffers, other kinds of trees also.
So, if you had something like that, like a not less than, not over than, it seems to me, and it would reduce the requirement of, measuring the canopy all the time. Because if, a couple of trees fall or get cut down for some reason, you're still within what's probably a relatively large percentage zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in measuring the tree, the drip line is I think I talked about that last time. Part of this is part of at least my mindset in going to this was the town's going to save more trees and probably try to save them in areas that the town values more. But also looking at it from a staff perspective and as someone who works with the folks that are reviewing those plans, making it so when I sit in the office reviewing a plan, I don't have to go to the field to field verify these things. So a drip line, very difficult to verify unless I'm actually going out and looking. If somebody shows me where a tree trunk is and they show a measurement of 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, I can look at a sheet of paper and tell, that's accurate.
All right, so we probably shouldn't. I mean, I think we are still at where we're at, right? I mean, I think
that seems like. I'll keep moving if you'd like. All right. So another question is: speaking of some of the more difficult sites around town, should the town establish a minimum lot size for tree preservation? I wrote the example on here, just an acre and smaller. I have to look back at my presentation from last time, but essentially some of the towns, again, south of us have, I think, an acre, acre and a half. Anything less than that is exempt completely. Is there some level that the town wants to look at?
Because what if there's a great, huge tree? I mean, that's the thing. You get just crushed by people who see, I don't know. The problem is trees don't last forever. We've already had the issue with the huge oak. So it is difficult to say you should keep every big tree, but fully exempt.
I wouldn't grant exemption like this simply because as soon as you have something like this, there is an opportunity to game the system. Right? You could create, I'm buying a 4-acre plot, but because of this, I'm going to, go in 4 different sizes. Right?
And I will say, so there's definitely possibility that the way we view developments are if the same property owner is directly next door, if it's being developed at the same time, that's counted as a zoning lot, and that's the way we would look at this. But there is definitely a possibility of gaming the system.
I wouldn't recommend we remove that. We establish a minimum lot size for it. This should be from 1 square foot up to whatever.
Okay. All right. Didn't know what to expect on that one. Sounds like that's not okay. What's the next one? So sorry, the second bullet point, back to, all right, so let's say we have 15%. If a site only has 5% tree canopy, should they be required to plant additional tree canopy and set that aside as preserved tree canopy, even though it's newly planted? Initially, if you remember, staff had proposed the site had to replant all the way back up to 15%. Heard a lot of mixed opinions on this, but it was critical enough of that idea to reduce it down to just 5% back. Now I've removed it completely. Should that be added back in? Should there be a replanting standard, or just if there's no trees on the site, then there's no trees existing, and that developer happened to get a good piece of property? Does that question make sense at all? Yeah. I see a lot of
So when you say what we would recommend approval, this is not in.
This is not in. So
so if you had a blank lot, you could just build whatever. You'd have to still do buffers and things that were required elsewhere in the UDO.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
But you wouldn't have to go plant 5 trees somewhere in front of your.
Right. You wouldn't have to establish tree canopy if it didn't exist. Essentially, that's what's recommended right now. Do you want some tree canopy to be established outside of a landscape buffer, foundation plantings, things like that?
There would still be trees required. Let's say it's a commercial, small, whatever. I mean, we still have requirements that would be trees in the front as well, correct? I mean, so you would have to plant something, even with what you're talking about, correct? This
right.
Isn't that.
Yeah. Every site's got to have a what we call landscape buffer on the 4 corners of a site. So
Or just like in a house, you've got to have like a certain number, you know. You're just not doing like a separate tree canopy area in addition to those things.
Exactly.
I don't want to penalize the new developments per se. I'm okay with this as long as it is not a burden or perceived to be a penalization because the lot didn't have any and the tree. I would almost put this as a recommendation versus a must-have, right? And
Recommendation doesn't matter.
They won't do it.
yeah, well,
You know, you just don't bother.
agreed. But at least, I hope if the developers are listening to their, the town or the citizens of the town and the needs of the town, and if the town is more greener, leaning, hopefully they will, on their own, add more trees to the space. That's just a hope, I know, but it's a balance we need to arrive at, right?
Any other towns have something similar?
Yes, sorry, I'm reading my chart here. Apex, this idea came from Apex. They did have a replanting standard, and it was based on, they had a specific amount of trees that had to be planted per square feet to replant.
Per square foot of the lot or
It was like 200 square feet. Every 200 square feet, every 200 square feet, it was like 2 shade trees, an understory tree, a bush, a shrub, something like that.
Russ, what do you think?
I think in fairness, there should be some trees added, but I'm not a fan of the clustered trees. I like landscape trees, and so I'm not sure how to phrase that. I still think it needs to count for landscaping versus just the perimeter of the property. So I know you're thinking, let's plant 20 by 60 foot of trees so it grows like a little forest. I'm fine with adding trees. I think if we're going to force other developments to keep trees, it's also fair to say buy some burlap trees and plant them somewhere. It doesn't need to be 20 or 15%, but 5% is fine.
Yeah, 5%.
I'm fine doing that.
Okay.
5% seems reasonable.
But even spread out trees are going to grow up, and eventually they're going to cover an area. I mean, yeah, you don't have to jam them in there together to get benefit.
Yeah, I mean, so as long as they're not investing in mature trees and they die, and as long as they're putting something in, I think most developments are going to have some type of landscape.
Well, again, some of those will still have to be in there anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about in addition to what would be required, but yeah.
As long as they are not bushes,
Well, this is trees.
as counted as trees, I'm okay with 5% being added.
Do you have a frame of reference on context for what percentage of undeveloped land in Morrisville would this apply to?
I thought about trying to prepare something like that, but it became more difficult than I realized at first. Again, broad strokes, I don't think it's going to apply to that many pieces of property. The real thing that I see this kind of being enforced on is, earlier Caleb discussed non-conforming sites. If you have a site that was developed a long time ago without 15% of trees, when that site goes to redevelop, how close can they get to that 5%? I'm just looking at an aerial image now, and most sites have a good amount of trees left that haven't been developed yet. So I don't think it'll apply to that many. Again, that's subjective.
So then the question becomes, if it doesn't apply very many, then it's not very onerous, so we should do it, or does that mean why bother?
I know I was the one that stood here and proposed that the town just require completely 15% back. The more I think about this, the more I think it becomes almost like a side thing that won't happen very much, but when it does happen, it might be effective. But again, there is going to be other plantings on a site. I think there's room for it if the board wants it.
I don't mind the 5%. I mean, 15 did seem like it was a lot, only because that might even interfere with certain developments.
And what are the implications going forward? It might be a silly question, but thinking about, okay, that's undeveloped land, cleared site, that's what it requires. Thinking then everything's developed, how does that impact future use in any way, or does it?
So if a site was redeveloped and didn't meet it. So I've done a lot of thinking about this one too, and it gets murkier the more I think about it. But essentially, the UDO defines that a non-conforming site has to be in compliance to the greatest extent practicable. A lot of times that does come down to a somewhat subjective standard. So if you have, I'll throw a scenario. So let's say there's a small building on a large piece of property, but the trees were cleared. You go to redevelop. Can they build a big building if they have room for the 5%, or do they have to place the 5% back? Those are the kind of scenarios you run into. I would say in that situation that it's practicable to plant those 5%, and they need to. But there's all kinds of just kind of back and forth unknown scenarios you could run into.
Do we have a consensus to put the 5% in, or do we think?
I'm agreeable to that.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody in favor in general, unless the 5%.
Is in favor? Okay. All right.
Again, trees, not bushes.
Not bushes. I remember that from the last meeting also. Okay. Okay. And then the last one was, I said earlier, Carrie really values those bigger trees. What emphasis should be placed on what Morrisville defines as specimen trees, and these are 24 inches or caliper or larger. Should these be somewhere else in the priority order? Should they be a higher priority order? Any last thoughts on specimen trees specifically?
I mean, they're not in the. Are they in the? They're not in the order really at all.
They're not in the order. The last order is mature trees, which this would fall into, but the bigger trees this size are not specifically called out.
You mean the ones with the roots that run all the way across town underground?
Yeah.
Are those the trees we're talking about?
I mean, you hate to lose a huge tree that has been there for a long time. But again, like I said, we've already had the problem with the one oak over at Copeland. I mean, our Cary, with the mall, they had a thing with a huge tree and it didn't survive. Sometimes with these, a super large tree it could be much later in its life cycle. I mean, to sit there and really plan the entire site around that, and then the tree is gone in like 10 years. I mean, I don't know if it's, although not that a 24-inch tree is essentially at the end of its life cycle, but yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously a 48-inch tree would come under this as well. So, I don't know. I mean, do we have it? I was trying to think of like how many large. I mean, 24 is not that big, so you're going to have a decent number of those, I think, in certain lots around town.
There are. I'm reviewing a site plan right now that it's about an acre of land that hasn't been developed previously, and it has 4 or 5 of these size trees on them. I think the reason I brought this back up was just to get it back before the board again.
And what would be the impact on that site then?
So that's the thing with these size trees. They are randomly distributed, and that's what we heard from research with Cary's champion tree ordinance was that there were so many variances that had to be applied for because these trees are randomly placed throughout the site. And but again, surveys showed that these trees were somewhat valuable. Staff feel that they're somewhat valuable, but is this really what the goal is, or is it the groupings of trees on those environmentally sensitive areas next to houses? Again, just want to get this back before the board one last time to kind of see the recommendation.
I wouldn't make a special call out of a larger tree. I think our largest we have is 12 called out. That's largest diameter width.
Anyone else?
I'm conflicted, so I'll let the others go first.
I mean, I think in general, most people are not saying do it, or.
I mean, I personally love trees, right? And I would, especially these mature trees provide a lot of shade. There is a lot of activities that can be organized around these mature trees. That's the reason why people like them. However, it also depends upon the type of the tree. Right? A banyan tree has a life of over 100 years or more, and is much better than a pine tree, right? So we just need to, when we say, we can't just generalize it based upon a term called specimen tree, right? There has to be, is it based upon the type of the tree there or no?
No, it's just based upon the caliper inches and 24 or bigger.
Would it fit in any way in our priority order if you go back to the?
You mean fit within one of these?
One of the categories.
Or you're saying, should we add one more priority, a fifth priority?
Well, I'm saying it a few ways. I'm saying, could this fit be another priority? Could it fit somewhere else? Do you think the priority order works the way it is now based more on the location of the site? Essentially, I'm asking, are these the trees that should be saved?
They would be a good tree to save, but I mean, as you said, they're pretty random. And so if we're going to have to constantly deal with variances and people, because this tree's in the dead middle of the site and it's the only place that makes sense, I mean, then it feels like we're constantly saying, oh, cut these trees down. And I mean, I guess we're doing it either way, but.
These trees could be, they're not exempted from this priority. If they're in that area, they still have to be saved.
That's right. And so they're already going to get collected. Some of them are going to be in these other areas already.
Essentially, I feel like bringing it up might have been more confusing than I thought, but it's just essentially, should this be in the priority? Are those bigger trees what you value?
I think what might help is in that number 4 where we say mature trees, right? What is maybe a definition of what's the minimum definition of a mature tree? That might help, right? So that can then include those 24 and inches or more.
Which it technically already does.
Yeah, it's just that there is
in
somewhere the mature tree definition needs to be explicit, right? It can't be a vague.
So the UDO does define mature trees. It doesn't have a caliper inch. It just says reach 75% of its maximum height. It's going to be.
And how do you measure that 75%?
It's
standards. I mean,
it's somewhat subjective. I mean, unless we ask. Yeah.
But there is really no way to enforce that, right? You are taking the word of the developer or whoever.
Well, I mean, essentially, I'll say when I'm reviewing a plan, a mature tree is when I go to the site and I look and there's very tall trees. I don't know that necessarily they meet the three quarters, but they're large, mature looking trees. They're not.
You can measure the height of the tree. I mean, you can do it with a protractor and a string. I mean, that's.
Agreed. That's why I said, right? We need to be a little bit more explicit if you want to cover that, right? If you want to give flexibility or, in other words, subjectivity to the staff, then this kind of definition could be okay. Because when you say mature tree, what may be mature for you may not be mature for somebody else.
I mean, I feel like the definition. I think we're covered on that. I mean,
okay.
I mean, I don't want to. I mean, again. 24-inch tree is nice, but like if it hamstrings development and then we get bogged down on the one tree rather than everything else on the lot and the massive trees, because I think that's kind of what's happening in a lot of Perry's instances is there's the one tree there that it has to be saved and that's great, but like is it better to concentrate on the larger overall canopy, which we're trying to do in these other things and increasing them? Maybe this is.
And that would be the final question, which is those one or two mature trees, are those priority, or is it the groupings of trees that might include some of those bigger trees?
I think it would be. My personal opinion is the grouping. I mean,
if it's going to go anywhere, I guess it would be 4. I don't think there's any other place for it.
Right.
Which again, it's technically that's already one of those. I mean, and while builders would want to build what they can, I mean, surely if there's a nice tree and they could save it, they probably would want to in some cases, just because it might add to their,
I don't know about
that. I mean,
what happens with some of those really big trees is you have one tree, but it's got a huge canopy, so that really takes a lot of that area.
And again, trees are, they can have drawbacks as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like there's a consensus that we would not put that in.
Okay. Well, I'll keep moving if you want me to. Yeah. All right. Well, this is a broad one, but any other comments or questions?
I feel like unless someone has any other comments, I think we've commented pretty well.
I think the only other comment I would make is between, now that we are getting lots of roads where there is a divider in between, right? Do these standards cover what can be planted or not planted within those dividers, right?
Yeah.
I would love to see some mature trees within those dividers that kind of provide canopy, but I understand that it can become a road hazard as well. But how do we balance what goes in that versus just having grass?
Right. So when a site's developed, we have a transportation plan as a town. It's based on some state plans, some just future vision for those roads. Trees that are within the future right-of-way cannot count towards their preservation. So if it's outside that, it could be preserved.
I don't mean from a developer point of view, right? I'm saying like the Morrisville Carpenter Road, which is now going to be 4-lane, right? And there will be a divider in between. And I'm presuming it's just not going to be a concrete block. There would be some, ability to plant bushes, shrubs, whatnot, to beautify the roadway, if you will.
Like in the middle, like the median?
Yeah, between the 4 lanes, right? There would be a divider of some sort. Yeah. Right, because right now we see a lot of places where it's a big concrete block, right? As opposed to leveraging that space.
Yeah, so that depends on a few things, but I'll say this, for a lot of the larger roads around town, the future plans do call for a planted median. Okay. Just right now, if a development happens on one side of Davis Drive, we can't have them build the entire median, right? It's very long range, but a lot of the larger roads do have a planted median plan in the middle of them. It just might not be happening now.
It's not something I think would work for the development side of that, just because of the...
Yeah, essentially, the developer builds on half the road. They only have to pay for that half. And so we just take a payment in lieu for that planted median to pay for in the future when the whole corridor can get widened. I don't know if that answers now, but...
No, it does. But taking that payment in lieu and materializing that intent, there's a big gap, right? And we need to figure out how that intent for which it was done is actually implemented. Yeah. Right? And that's where I typically see is by the time that event comes, things have moved along and the intent for which it was taken is no longer applicable. Mm-hmm. Because either restrictions, some state law change, this change, that change. So the gap between taking the payment of lieu and actually fulfilling that piece, that gap needs to be, we need to look at ways to reduce that from 22 years to perhaps 5 years, 10 years, right? That kind of thing.
Sure. Well, and I'll say for National Drive, it was shown on the plan in 2004, but that payment in lieu happened in 2016 and 2018, and then just this timing happened to work out, and we were able to take advantage of that. Yeah. I'll say at least for planning staff, we're looking at those opportunities. We may have another one coming forward soon, may not, depending on private development and who can use that money.
And not to get off track too much, but we have the widening of McCrimmon Parkway coming up and some widening on NC 54 coming up, and we do have some payment in lieu for those roadways. So what we call betterments, which some of those landscape medians are considered betterments, we do have some money to put towards some of those types of improvements.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Anything else for trees right now? If not,
if I could summarize, Chris, before you go to the next section, because I think you're going to go to common open space. The only thing that I heard from the board in terms of revisions was putting back the 5% replanting. It sounded like the board was okay with everything else?
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Yep. And I think that 5%, and I think we said not to include that 24 caliber
Correct.
part,
Yeah.
right?
The only thing we were,
So that was more of a question than an amendment, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. All right, well, let's move on. Let me go through all these old slides. So next is common open space. Again, this is for commercial sites, just space on the commercial sites. So just a few updates, not a lot. First one was the common open space previously mentioned public art had the recommendation to move away from that term and define it as architectural design features or something like that. So especially get rid of that public art sentiment and move it towards the design features. That was it. Any other comments, questions, thoughts from the board on common open space?
Anyone? We're good.
We're good, okay. All right, those are my slides from the last meeting. Next is perimeter buffers. This includes your street yard buffer as well as your side yard and rear yard buffer. And again, this goes back to should the UDO, staff's proposing that the street yard require certain size trees to remain. What is that number? Previously was 6 inches. I think I heard that might have been too small. Now we propose 12 inches. I don't know if that's
reasonable, I think.
Fine with 12.
we're good. Okay. Any other thoughts regarding that? No. Okay. I'll keep moving. And the last one is where'd I go? Just general landscaping. Sorry, I'm jumping around a lot. Last meeting, staff had proposed all new shrubs be 36 inches at time of planting. I heard that might be a little too high for maybe some of the public comments. Now we're just proposing 24 inches, so 2 feet at time of planting. Any thoughts?
That's fine.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I think within a few years there will be 36.
Okay.
I have an unrelated comment.
Sure.
With the shrubs. And I don't know if this would be covered under the UDO, but like in Park West Village, there's that road that goes through all the roundabouts, and then in front of where the Target is, there's trees lining that roadway, and then those shrubs in between, and oftentimes those can impede the line of sight when making turns out there, making it kind of dangerous, and people blow through those stop signs all the time. And is there anything in the UDO that covers how far it is or away from the curb to make sure that there's a decent line of sight for drivers?
This is a good question. I know exactly what you're talking about. So 2 answers. The first one is on entering a public road. There are sight distance triangles, and so nothing's supposed to be within those triangles. So it's essentially it's bigger when you're at your car, and then you get away, it gets smaller and smaller. So theoretically, nothing's in that area. For a site like Park West, where it's more private development within a parking lot, there's nothing that I'm aware of. I'm looking over at you both. No, neither. Okay. Yeah, I don't think for private interior development there's anything like that. The UDO does actually require plantings along kind of those areas. That's something that we could look at, though. I mean, if that's something the board would like, getting other kind of distance requirements from driveways, drive aisles.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that was a factor that's considered in what's covered under the UDO to make sure that motorists have a line of sight. And it sounds like it is on public roadways.
Public roadways, yeah, there are, but not in a shopping center like Park West or another shopping center. Yeah.
So again, it depends upon how the road moves along, right? For example, if you go on Town Hall Drive, as you come towards Downing Glen, when coming out of Downing Glen, it is really hard to see the traffic coming in from Downing Glen, just going that way, right? So it is, and a lot of that site is blocked by the bushes that are around the curb.
We did that.
So even though it is a public road, because of the way the traffic pattern is, it's hard to see the oncoming traffic from there.
What happened there is that the road was built in one configuration, and then they moved the stop bars back behind the walkway, the crosswalk, to help pedestrians, and now no one can see. We did that all through Downing, and I'm not sure why, but yes, that was about like 6 or 7 years ago that they made that change, and so I know exactly what you're talking about because I drive through it all the time.
So it is causing issues. So you might want to take a look at it.
We can't fix that now because, but
yeah,
you'd have to have the town, somebody try to cut that stuff back, I guess.
But I think we can keep that in mind for future amendments and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I know that intersection you speak of. Yeah. That is. Okay. Any other thoughts on this slide here? Okay, I'll keep moving. Again, that's previous slides. And then I guess any last comments or questions from the board? And then after this, I can move on to talk about my recommendation and then recommended action tonight.
Chris, any more?
No other questions? No.
I think you can move on.
Okay. You are requested tonight, the board is approval with changes, without changes, or recommend denial of the amendments. From what I've heard, if you were to recommend approval with changes, it would be to require 5% replanting. How would I word that? Just, I would say, require 5% of replanting if the site does not meet the minimum standards for tree preservation. And this is your ordinance if just, you can just say you recommend approval changes, or recommend denial of this ordinance.
Make a motion?
You are
I'll make
welcome.
a motion to approve ordinance 2022-76-0 of the Morrisville Town Council approving text amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance related to tree preservation, open space, perimeter buffers, and landscaping. There'll be one change. We'll be adding 5% replant in open areas.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ken, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries.
Thank you.
Brooke, did you get everybody?
Newsletter.
All right. Planning newsletter.
All right. So we got a couple new applications in this past month, some site plan and construction plan reviews. Another life science facility proposed in the McCrimmon area, and the other was for Chapel Hill Tire. That was rezoning on Davis Drive, kind of across from the Wegmans, close to Holly Creek, that you had previously reviewed. Affordable housing implementation project continues to be moving. So we had a kickoff meeting with our consultant HRNA on April 22nd. They've really hit the ground running. We have some draft surveys that we're going to be distributing soon to town staff and school system staff regarding the potential community housing choice program. And they are setting up interviews with a number of developers right now as part of their evaluation of potential UDO incentives to encourage affordable housing. So that project has taken off. We are also in the final stages of selecting a consultant for the larger UDO update to align that code with the land use plan. I think we've talked about that before. First phase of that will be some additional TOD planning for the properties on the west side and the code associated with that. And then last month, Town Council did approve a number of annexations. There were 5 of them, all on the same night. A majority of them, again, were along the McCrimmon Extension area. We just continue to see a lot of activity there. Not a surprise. I think when that road opened up, that was expected, but it definitely is a high volume and a lot of activity and development proposals going on in that area right now. So at least 3 of those annexations were for that area. And then the Chapel Hill Tire property and some property on Slater Road. And then we also approved a new daycare center to be located at 611 Church Street, kind of in the area of Sterling Montessori. So a lot going on, and I think that is all I have.
Thank you. Do we have any comments, David?
No comments. Thank you for the presentations today.
No comments.
Sanjay?
No, thank you.
I'd like to say the presentations were extremely organized. All of the attachments, it really helps us get through the meetings quickly when we can do our homework before we come. So thank you for putting all the attachments. I really appreciate it.
That was helpful.
These guys worked really hard on it. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
they appreciate that.
Thank you, everyone. That's it. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.